Thank you very much, Deborah, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. I'm going to talk about vibrations, and I invite you all to ask questions as I talk. I see a couple of students from my class here from BU, and so they're used to asking questions. Start off, I'm going to, like Deborah said, I'm going to give you a little bit of a technical introduction to vibrations from an engineering side, and then I'm going to talk about some of the work that I've done with biologists and some work within the engineering world. So it's always a great pleasure for me to have any conversation about vibrations with people from outside of engineering. And so I want to thank Wendy for being the real catalyst for getting me interested in how vibrations play out in various art projects. And also I'll be talking about some work I did with Karen Workington, who's a biologist at Boston University, who also opened my eyes. So I always learn something about vibrations when I talk to non-engineers about vibration. I'm looking forward to learning something tonight. So a technical definition that's from our textbook at Boston University: any motion that repeats itself after an interval of time is called a vibration or oscillation. So that could mean one frequency or many frequencies added together. To give you a little idea of what a simple vibration would look like, the blue object on the left is vibrating at a single frequency, and we're tracking the motion, plotting the displacement. I'll be showing some vibration plots, so when you see the vibration plots, you want to imagine that we've actually measured the motion of some surface or some point on a surface, and then we've plotted it versus time. Almost all vibration involves a change in the shape of the thing that's vibrating. Very, very seldom do we actually get rigid objects like that just moving up and down. We get metal surfaces bending, and usually there's some strain. So as I said, this is a single frequency vibration. This is the most simple vibration to kind of understand. And now I'll show you a little movie of a more complex vibration that involves many frequencies being added together. And one of the things we do in vibration is we take signals like that and we break them down into a sum of different frequencies called Fourier analysis. So the ways we describe vibration are by looking at displacement, velocity, or acceleration versus time. The period is the time it takes for a vibration to repeat itself. And the amplitude is the largest value of displacement that we see. Now, like I said, we sometimes use velocity or acceleration, but many times we use displacement. The frequency of vibration I'll be talking about, number of cycles per second, or one of the period. One of the interesting things about vibration, and the thing that I've spent a lot of time over the past 25 years researching, is the interaction between sound and vibration. And it's quite complicated. And one of the first things I'd like to say is that not all vibrations create sound. So if I move my hand back and forth, it's very low frequency, but you're not hearing any sound from it. And the question you may ask is why? So a lot of times when you have a vibration, all it really does is move air or water back and forth. And that's a picture of air being moved back and forth by the upward and downward motion of that black surface. So when the surface goes down, it pulls the air in. When the surface goes back up, it pushes the air out. And you never hear that because the air is not being compressed. So when you hear sound, you're actually hearing a combination of compression and expansion of air. And what's happening in this case is that the black surface that's moving up and down is actually not moving fast enough to compress the air. And the air has plenty of time to actually move out of the way and then move back. So at a very low frequency, like this, you won't be compressing air, you won't be creating acoustic waves. So I'll call those silent vibrations. Loud vibrations happen when you have a surface or an object that's moving at a higher frequency, and the frequency is so high that the only choice the air has is to be compressed and expanded at that surface. Now, on the left, you see the black object moving down, and the air that's in contact with it has to expand because the volume has increased. The surface moved down, the air expands. Because that air expands, the layer next to it gets compressed. The layer above it gets expanded, and that's an acoustic wave that would then propagate away from that surface. So on the left, the surface is moving down, the air next to it's being expanded. On the right, it moves up, it gets compressed, and you launch an acoustic wave that would be going upwards. So there are all kinds of things around us vibrating that we don't hear. Now, we can sense them by touching surfaces, but we don't always hear them. I did a lot of research on brake squeal, and I'll be talking about this. And brake squeal is an interesting thing because there's not a whole lot of vibration. But the funny thing about automotive brakes is they're really good at creating sound. They're really good at doing this kind of physics, and I'll explain why as part of the presentation. The other thing I wanted to say is that humans tactically sense vibrations roughly below 400 hertz. But we hear over a much, much broader range. Most people say 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So we hear with this gigantic frequency range acoustically, but we tactically sense vibrations quite low in frequency. And one of the interesting things that has come up is the fact that vibrations don't have a very high baud rate. They can't be used to communicate a lot of information like sight and sound can be used to communicate. But one of the interesting things about vibration is that we don't intellectually think about vibrations that we sense, but we do emotionally think about them. And they have a connection to us, to our consciousness, that is sometimes subliminal. In infrasound, and you, of course, have probably followed all of the controversy about the wind turbines, and a colleague of mine is researching that, is a really good example. It's possible that we're sensing the vibrations at low frequency caused by infrasound, even though we're not hearing it. So there's all kinds of situations where we sense things and don't, vibration, we don't hear them. One of the interesting things about sound and vibration is, here's some calculations at 1,000 hertz. That 1,000 hertz is really kind of right in the sweet spot of where humans like to listen and talk and so forth. So 0 dB of sound is the threshold of hearing. That's right at the point where we can actually detect any sound at all. And at a kilohertz, it's the displacement that's required to compress that air to create that sound is only 0.1 angstroms. Normal conversation of 40 decibels is created by a 10 angstrom, 10 to the minus 10th meters of vibration amplitude. And then as you go down that chart, 80 decibels of busy traffic, 0.1 microns, microns 10 to the minus 6 meters. You get all the way to the threshold of human pain where the noise is so loud you're in pain, 130 decibels, but the vibration that causes that is only 1/10 of a millimeter. So one of the interesting things about vibrations is we don't see vibrations that create lots of sound. I've looked at squealing brakes, stood beside squealing brakes, and they're deafening, and you can't see that vibration. So a small amount of vibration creates a lot of noise. Vibration carries a ton of energy because, like I said, you're usually deforming, elastically deforming, stretching, twisting, bending the metal, the wood, whatever the vibration is occurring on. You're putting a lot of energy into that strain, whereas the energy that acoustics, the energy in acoustic waves is quite small. Somebody said that if you took an entire stadium in England at its highest volume and took all of that energy, all the acoustic energy coming from an entire soccer stadium and at its highest volume, it wouldn't be enough energy to fry an egg. But vibrations carry a lot more energy. And we know that low-frequency seismic vibrations can just propagate great distances around the world. I'm going to talk about automotive brake squeal just to give you an idea of how complex vibrations can be and to actually show you some vibrations, some real vibrations that we measured. And so this is the thing that stops your car. And this big circular plate here is called a rotor. And there are actually two plates connected by some heat fence. So you see those little ridges there. And that gets bolted on to the axle of your car. And then that big clump of metal to the left there is what's called the caliper. And inside that rusty piece of metal is the pad. And so your car presses the two pads against the rotor's spinning. And you have this opportunity for energy to leave the pad caliper and cause vibration of that large circular rotor. We did some studies of what the vibration of that system would look like, and it's quite elaborate. So here's some movies. Now, first let me explain what you're seeing. On the upper left, the curve there that says 1,152 hertz, this brake system is vibrating at 1,152 hertz, which is actually quite low for brake squeal. And you're looking at the vibration of the rotor, and to the left of all of these pictures is the caliper and the pad. And the vibrations, as you move up in frequency, become much more complicated. And the reason why is there's a basic principle in vibrations that a lot of vibrations propagate as very complicated waves, and their wavelength gets smaller as frequency goes up. Basic rule in acoustics and vibrations, wavelength goes down as frequency goes up. So what you're seeing are waves propagating circumferentially around the rotor and going in circles, and constructively and destructively interfering with each other. And when you look at these patterns, one of the things that's happening is one wave goes clockwise, another wave goes counterclockwise. How they combine depends on their relative phase to each other. So if they match up just right, they combine and create a standing pattern, like what you see at the upper left. But sometimes they don't actually match up. Sometimes they combine and interfere in strange ways, and you get the more elaborate patterns that you see in the lower. Now, these are higher frequencies. 12 kilohertz is quite high. But one of the interesting things that happens is these waves propagate around the rotor, and they actually go underneath the pad caliper and cause vibration of the pad caliper, and they couple to the vibration of the pad and caliper. Now, when we did this project, we were funded by Ford Motor Company, and nobody really knew where the sound was coming from. That sounds strange, it's coming from the brake. But what part of the brake? At that time, this was a few years ago, it was estimated that brake squeal was costing $1 billion a year in warranty costs. So these are people who bought cars under warranty, the brakes would squeal, they take them back. So it was quite a big problem, and nobody knew where the sound was coming from. So we were doing numerical calculations. Was it coming from the pad caliper piece, or was it coming from the rotor? We realized it was coming from the rotor. But we also realized something really fascinating, which is that if you look at some of these frequencies, if you look at the wavelength of the wave that's propagating circumferentially around the brake, that wavelength at 12 kilohertz is exactly, or very close, to the acoustic wavelength. And what happens is, when you look at the acoustic radiation from vibrations, there's something called coincidence effect, which says that if that wavelength matches up to the wavelength of sound, you get extremely good radiation. Better than a Stradivarius violin, you just get perfect radiation out. And so it turns out that the brake rotor design was an extremely unfortunate coincidence. If the dimensions had been changed, and the design had been something different, that matching would not have occurred, and brake squeal wouldn't be near the problem it is now. The issue with that, and of course engineering, is you have a hard time trying to convince Ford Motor Company that they should throw away 50 years of evolutionary design on a brake, and just because it squeals. And they have a reaction, which is, first we have to stop the car, and a redesign may put that in jeopardy. So it's not an easy discussion to have, and people are still working on brake squeal. You'll know when we succeed, because the world will be a quieter place. So that's a look at vibrations. I talked about vibrations at points, but this gives you a really good picture of how vibrations kind of travel in complex ways through systems. I wanted to talk a little bit about biology. Deborah mentioned in her introduction that I'm interested in the built world, improving the built world, but I'm also interested in understanding the natural world as well. So I'm going to start off with a really interesting paper that I was not involved in this research, but in the process of preparing for this talk, I came across it. I was fascinated, and this comes from University of Southern Denmark, and I'd given a talk there, and they have a lot of great vibration analysts there at University of Southern Denmark. And this paper completely captivated me, because I wasn't aware that biologists had disagreements of opinion on whether snakes could hear or not. I figured that would have been settled. And it turns out it's not a settled issue at all, because they don't have an outer ear, and they don't have a tympanic middle ear. And so biologists were actually quite confused or in conflict about this. And this paper, from as late as 2011, it's just a couple years ago, this paper was published and really presented definitive evidence for the fact that snakes, at least the royal python that they did the studies on, but we can extrapolate, actually do not hear, they use vibrations. And I thought it was fascinating the way they went about it. what they did is, that's a picture of a royal python on the left. They were able to put electrodes in and measure brain activity, so they could tell when the python had sensed either vibration or sound. And they put the snake on a little rig. It's very elaborate if you read the paper. And they played sound, and they could make the rig vibrate as well. So they could play sound, cause vibration. And now you're going to ask the question after my previous slides, how did they create vibration without sound? But they worked that out. So the plot that you see up on the left, A is the vibration they played to the snake. B is their neural response in microvolts. C is the sound pressure they played to the snake. And D is the neural response in microvolts. What they did is this. They realized that they needed to find thresholds for sound and thresholds for vibration. So they did an experiment. They say, what's the minimum sound we can play to the snake to get a response? Minimum vibration. Okay. They put an accelerometer on the snake's head. And what they realized, they could measure the vibration. What they realized is this. When they crank up the volume of sound loud enough to get a response from the snake, the vibration of the skull of the snake was above their vibrational threshold of sensing. And so that was evidence that they're actually sensing vibration. Now you see what a long lower jaw they have. They actually put that on the ground when they want to do their measurements of vibration, when they want to find a predator or a prey or whatever. And you can imagine the vibrations propagating up through their jawbone, and they can sense prey. So it's believed, at least in this paper, that evolutionarily speaking, they actually, as a species, made a decision at some point that vibrations was much more useful for them than sound, and they chose one. So for finding prey, vibration was more useful because seismic waves propagate in the ground. And it turns out that in most natural habitats, a 100 hertz seismic wave is pretty common, and that's exactly the sensitivity of the python. 100 hertz is the vibration that they like to sense. Now, because they gave up hearing, the paper raises an interesting question which they don't answer. How do they communicate with each other? And so the question is, now do they cause vibrations to create seismic waves like elephants would to communicate with another snake? So I thought that was fascinating. I didn't do the work, but I was fascinated by it. Now I'm going to talk about work I was involved in. Okay. This is the red-eyed tree frog. This particular breed species lives in Panama. This is what it looks like in the egg before it's born. It's born as a tadpole. They're clear eggs. The mother frog lays a clutch of several eggs on a leaf. That's the middle picture of a leaf. Takes 7 days, 4 to 7 days. They hatch, they fall into the water. So that's their life cycle. They hatch as tadpoles. Now, snakes and wasps like to eat these things. In fact, more than 50% of the clutches are attacked by a snake or a wasp, particularly tree snakes. So that's a picture of some tree snakes attacking. The frogs can hatch their egg and escape the predator. They can be born early to escape death. And they can hatch themselves in a matter of seconds. And vibration's their cue. There's a long story behind that, which we can talk about after. But after a great deal of biological experiment, they realized they sensed the vibration of a predator eating their clutch. Their neighbor got eaten. They sensed that vibration. They hatched their egg and they escaped. The question was, how do they sense, and what's their decision-making algorithm? Because it turns out that they're vibrated their whole time in the egg by wind and rain. And I'll show you that the wind and rain vibrations are not all that different from a predator. And we're talking about something that's pre-tadpole in age. No A to D board and hard disk and computational software to make this decision. They have to make it somehow. So just to make you a believer, here's a movie. That's a clutch of eggs. So you can see every little dark spot's their eyes. The wire's going to an accelerometer where we measure the vibration caused by the snake starting to eat these eggs. And after a while, a bunch of them will come alive and realize that, well, they were alive already, but they'll become alert and they'll realize they're about to be eaten and they'll actually start falling. So now they're starting to hatch themselves. So the snake stops and watches. Strangely enough, but that's what happens. And there goes my dinner, I guess. And so we set about trying to figure out the following. How do they tell the difference between a snake about to eat them, here's a whole different experiment, and wind and rain? How do they tell the difference The biology team collected 1,000 clutches over several months with funding from the National Science Foundation, and they set about trying to answer that. And what they realized is these are vibration plots of the vibration in a frog egg clutch, and that's a snake bite, and it's not all that different in magnitude and frequency than rain falling. They won't hatch in rain. They're never fooled by this. And it's not sight, because we can mechanically play recorded signals back, so there's nothing to see, smell, and we elicit the same behavior. So just to show you how elaborate these were, there's our experiment. There's a mini shaker clutch interface. There's a student playing different vibrations and doing all kinds of measurements, 1,000 clutches. End of the story is that they pay attention to what's called the gross temporal pattern. They don't care what the vibration is. In their mind, it's either on or off, and it's really not that different with you or I, right? When we touch something, it's kind of vibrating or not. As long as it's in our frequency range. For us, less than 400 hertz. For these, we don't know exactly what their frequency range is. But they hatch, and this gives you an idea of what our conclusions were, published in a number of papers. We view the world in very simple terms, vibration on or off. If it's on, we call it a duration. Duration is on, interval's off. And then you're seeing a lot of work in one plot over there in which we plotted the mean proportion hatched versus interval and duration. So what combination of on-off of vibration do they actually pay attention to? And we found that combination, roughly a second on, a second off. You see the bright spot on the plot. So we answered that question. We're on to new questions now. One of the experiments they did last summer was really fascinating. We developed an experiment. We said, what's their memory like? How often do you get the chance to test the memory of a frog embryo? Well, you have to present them with something that they care about, not flashcards, but their life. And so what we did is we took the scariest signal we could play to them, and we played a portion of it. And then we just stopped it, silence for a while, wondering if their memory resets or not resets, some length of time. Then we turn it on again and ask if they hatch or not. If they hatch, they've remembered the entire history. They haven't reset. If they don't hatch, they have reset. Well, it turned out that they pretty much hatched. They did actually have a long memory. They do remember past danger, and they integrate it, and they make a decision about whether to hatch or not. Well, the biologists have done studies, and if they hatch early, their chance of survival in the water is less because they're smaller and they can't escape predators in the water. So if you're a frog embryo, you sit in your egg saying, a danger here, danger in the water, where's the danger more? And the minute you decide the danger is less in the water than it is in your egg, you hatch and escape. So you can ask the question, well, wait a second, they've never hatched before, they've never been in the water, they've never been eaten by a snake, how do they know that? It's the secret of evolution, which is that long ago, there were frogs that had all different ideas about what the danger in the water and the egg were, and those that survived had the right ideas. So to some degree, evolution has encoded on them a risk assessment that sees into the future on some level. And so we find that fascinating. And like I said, we're still doing work on this. We've actually teamed up with the computer scientists now to use some algorithms from computer science to understand their behavior. I know I'm out of time, so there's some acknowledgments for some of the research that I presented. We had one demo. Can I do the demo of it? I didn't want to stop the lecture without actually showing you live vibrations. And every laptop, or most laptops nowadays, has a 3D accelerometer built into it. And if you download on a Mac, a size Mac software, you can plot it. And so we're seeing the live vibration. You're seeing 3 plots, which is acceleration in the X, which is generally that way, Y is that way, Z is up. So I want you to pay attention to the top plot and notice that if I jump, I've got to zoom in a little bit. Hold on just a minute. Whoops, that's zooming out. That it actually is quite sensitive. Sorry, bottom plot, Z-axis. That's the acceleration up. So the vibration of me over here is actually propagating all the way to the floor up to the laptop. We thought it would be fun if everybody stomped their feet at the same time. We could see how much vibration we could get. Perfect. So, now quiet. That means I'm done. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Deborah. This is really a treat to be here. And it's really fun to work with Greg. again. So I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be describing 4 examples of, or 4 experiences collecting vibrations in 4 very different locations. But before I do that, I just want to show a few examples by biologists who are doing other experiments with vibration and communication. So this is a California mantis shrimp, and like all shrimp, it doesn't have ears, and therefore it's been assumed that because they don't have ears that they don't perceive sound. But biologist Sheila Patek, who right now is at the UMass at Amherst, discovered that the shrimp both transmit and receive information, communication, by vibration, so as tactile sound. And this is Donna, who's an African elephant at the Oakland Zoo, and Caitlin O'Connell Rodwell is a biologist who studies elephant communication. And she discovered that elephants communicate over long distances through vibration. And interestingly, Caitlin started off as an entomologist, studying insects. And she was, and insects also communicate by vibration. When I say communicate, it doesn't mean that they're saying hi to other insects, but they're getting information from like a leaf that's slightly moving. And so when an insect is in its listening mode, it's like this. It puts one foot in the air, and it really focuses on the foot that's on the ground. And when she was in Africa looking at insects, she noticed that elephants were doing the same thing, that they would put one foot in the air and just sort of look intently. And so she thought that that this might be the same thing, that they were paying attention to vibration. And it turns out that they were. And so that the elephant is, it creates a vocalization called a rumble, which is different than a vocalization that you hear through the air. And so the rumble is a really low frequency. It's below 20 hertz. And so you can't hear it, but you feel it in your bones. You feel it in your whole body. And when I was visiting the zoo, and she made this vocalization, this rumble, and each time she did it, I thought there was a truck right behind me because it had that feeling of like something big and vibrating. And she's actually standing on top of a platform that has a transducer, which is electromechanical device, which is playing vibrations, and so that they're testing her to see how low she can perceive vibration and the different patterns. So back at MIT, I made a floor, and I made it to vibrate. And it's not so different than the one that the elephant is standing on. And this is at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. And underneath the floor are 6 big electromechanical transducers. It's like a big subwoofer without the speaker. And it plays vibration. It plays sound as vibration, in particular the low sounds. And I hosted a 3-day event, and these are participants lying on the floor, and they are listening to the sounds of the California mantis shrimp. And they're listening to it the way the shrimp listen to it, and through their skin as vibration. And this was useful to me. This is just a brief animation that Gershon found for me. And it's actually an advertisement by a company that makes headphones, but it shows how how sound enters your ear and goes into the cochlea. But it also this is their device. It also can enter your ear through bone conduction. And so it's another way of hearing. And so this is when I met Greg, because I hosted this 2-day symposium, and on the first day we had 20 different speakers and signers from 20 different disciplines, each presenting for 15 minutes their work on vibration. And as they presented it, the audience, we also played their work through the floor, and so the audience sitting on the floor could feel it as well as hear them describing it. And then at night we had a big party, and oh, it's too bad the lights. Can we dim the lights? Because it's a little hard to see, or maybe you can just imagine. But anyhow, we had a big party, and a number of musicians who work in those low sounds played their work, and the guests could feel it, like, you know, by sitting on the floor. And so here, Eric Gunther is. He's making sort of vocalizations into the mic. You can see him sitting on the floor, and everybody is feeling it through their butts, you know, sitting on the ground. And then I took the floor on the road, and this is at Cabinet Space in New York. So it's sponsored by Cabinet Magazine, and this is in collaboration with George Pruchnick, who's a writer who wrote a book about silence. And so we had a silent party, and again, there's 5 or 6 musicians, and they wrote pieces specifically in the low range, and we played their work through the floor. And nobody, the rule was you couldn't talk at this event, and so there's all these little yellow cards, and so you could write notes to each other and pass them around, which sort of opened up a whole new way of thinking about communication, because the same piece of communication could go to several different people, or kept or taken out of circulation. So my interest in exploring vibration started as a walk in the city in Washington, D.C. at Gallaudet University. And Gallaudet is sort of the hub of deaf culture in the United States, or even in the world. And I took a group of students to Gallaudet and to work with a group of students there to try to map out the shape of space from a deaf perspective. So we were looking at deafness spatially as opposed to lack of audition. And this is, we're trying to map the conversation between 2 deaf and 2 hearing individuals. And that experience has been a really rich one, and I've continued to work with that group, the faculty and students, over several years. And last March, Greg and I went down to Gallaudet for a 2-day workshop when we were trying to, we were putting vibrations in different buildings, and we were running around campus testing the different buildings to see what their resonant frequency was, or how we could make them sort of sing. The idea was to try to make a building sing. And here's a big transducer that we attached to the underside of the stairs going into the big common room, the cafeteria. And the sounds that we played on it went, you know, up the railing and around, and so you could hear it by hanging onto the railing. And I think what we played through it was the Gallaudet students' marching band anthem, which is, you know, a huge bass drum that they play at football games to signal the players, you know, about when to do something. This spring I went to Sharjah, which is on the Persian Gulf next to Dubai. And I was a guest at the Sharjah Biennale, where they invited 6 different artists and musicians and academics all together to come together to talk about sound in the context of deafness. And this is a workshop that I did with a group of students at a school for the deaf in Sharjah. And assuming that everyone perceives sound, even if they're deaf, we gave them each a recorder, a sound recorder. We went out into the city with the ambition to sort of map the city of Sharjah sonically. And so here they're recording, I think it's a large air conditioning unit. And and so I was anticipating that we'd be picking up, those vibrations of passing cars or trucks or the air conditioning unit. This is a trolley that's going bump, bump, bump along the sidewalk. But interestingly, they were also picking up things that I never dreamed that they would focus on. And this is a man sweeping dust in a plaza, and the students were dutifully recording this sound of the man sweeping dust. And it's a very quiet sound. Once we had sort of been out and collected the sounds, we came back, and I had a big weather balloon and used a really tiny transducer, like the size of a quarter, and put it against the balloon, and the balloon became the resonant chamber, sort of like the guitar or the violin box. And so we could play these sounds that they recorded, and we could play them back as vibration through this balloon. And so when we played the sounds, everyone agreed upon every sound, like, oh yes, this is the police siren going off. This is the car honking, and like this is the man sweeping sand. And there was no doubt that that's what it was. And it completely changed my idea of what sound was. And I don't think it's vibration in this case. I think that there's a kind of visual sound. And watching somebody sweep the sand and the rhythm of him sweeping is sound, is a visual sound, and that maps onto the touch, the feeling of that same, the vibrations in that same rhythm. That's a guess, but it was really sort of an eye-opening moment for me. And then I'm going to conclude with a project where of trying to listen to ice. And this is 80 degrees north, which is an archipelago in the Barents Sea, 800 miles north of Siberia. And I went there as a part of this artist residency program for the purpose of listening to ice. And I didn't know what I would find, if anything, but I just thought that I wanted to try to listen to something as a way of having an intimate relationship to something. And when you think of the Arctic, it's vast, it's huge, it's scary, it's cold, and is it possible to have an intimate relationship with something that's that big and cold? And so I thought I could do that maybe by putting my ear to the ground. Oops. So I brought a hydrophone with me, and a hydrophone is like a microphone that's designed to go in water. That line leads to the hydrophone, which is in the little hole in the ice. And it was a lot of quiet. It was very, very quiet. And then I put the hydrophone in the water and started picking up a lot of sound. And what this is these are called Bergy bits. And Bergy bits are the ends of a glacier. So the glacier in Spitsbergen there is about 4,000 years old. And over 4,000 years, the snow collects and compresses and moves down and compresses some more. And by the time, it's always moving. And by the time it gets to the sea and breaks off into the sea, that compressed snow and ice is 4,000 years old. And those little tiny bits, pockets of air that were frozen into that ice 4,000 years ago are all like tightly compressed. And so when they fall into the sea, which is relatively warm, they all start exploding. And all of those little tightly, compressed pockets of air just explode like popcorn. And so that's the sound that I was picking up. And so then I took that sound and I put it in a series of platforms that are painted white and sanded and painted and sanded and painted so that they're really buttery smooth, and played them through transducers so that you could feel the sound of that ice, feel the sound of those air pockets popping.
So maybe I'll start with you, Wendy. You clearly have a strong interest in science, and you seek out scientists to be able to do your work. And so that's just sort of a big question, and maybe how you found each other, or how you found Greg and vibration.
Well, I was hosting this Waves and Signs, this event at MIT, and I was looking around for people in any field who worked with vibration. And a friend of mine teaches at BU in mechanical engineering, Cheryl Grace. Some of her colleagues are also here. And so I told her about the project, and she said, "Oh, you have to meet Greg. His world is vibration." She said. So I asked. I just sent him an invitation to see if he would present.
So for you, Greg, was that the first time an artist kind of sought you out to do something? Yeah.
Definitely. And as I mentioned, I always learn something in our collaborations and our conversations with artists, and also with the biologists that I've worked with.
So are you currently still collaborating? Are you still working on a project together, or?
Wendy?
No, well, I hadn't say we. Well, the project at Gallaudet is this sort of ongoing thing.
Right.
And so we went down there together in March, and there's always something else will happen, and I don't know what. But we're not specifically working on anything right now. Yeah.
So maybe just another one for you, Wendy, which is especially that last piece you did. It just seems like you're really like making poetry of science, like listening to ice. That is sort of a leap of faith that you would even do that. Mm-hmm. So it seems like you're actually, you're sort of actualizing a poetic idea, and I have a feeling that might come into somewhere is in your work too, that it's not all hard science. It
right.
seems like it's you're looking at frogs, and so maybe that's just a comment. Does anybody want to jump in? Any other thoughts? I guess maybe.
Yeah. I just have a question.
Yeah.
I had this experience a couple of days ago where I was sitting in the car, and all of a sudden my whole body was vibrating. And it was kind of scary. And I think it was someone in the car next to us with playing some sort of, but it wasn't music. It was, I felt it. I didn't hear it. I felt it. But I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was not directional in the way sound usually is.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was interesting. I wonder if you have that, because you've got a surface, so people know where the vibration is coming from, but actually, would they?
Vibration it's not stereo, is it? Like you don't perceive it through your ears in stereo, so it's harder to understand like where it's coming from.
And the wavelengths are so much larger that you lose directionality. And I remember reading about, I think it's the scorpion who can locate where vibration's coming from by putting the feet down and taking the difference between vibrations that comes from there. So they can actually kind of triangulate to a source of vibration. It's kind of interesting. But at low frequencies, who knows, right?
But that really travels through cars, especially someone's has a bass going.
The question, I guess, is that we're listening to both of you talk about these things and even show diagrams and kind of imagine them. Have you found various ways of actually make them a sensory experience more, so that we could feel the vibrations and could hear the sounds and could sort of, or
here today.
The other question is it a medium that you can carry on with and make, compose with or whatever?
So the conference that Wendy had, we had a lot of people like that who had done some artists that had done some things like that were absolutely fascinating. And one of them was he had made a suit with a lot of vibration sensors that could also cause vibration. So first they would record, then they would play it back. And what he did is he had his girlfriend dump a bunch of, a bucket of stuff on top of him and videotape it at the same time that he recorded the vibration. Then he could take the videotape and put it here so that it looks like something's about to fall on you. And then he would play back the vibration at the same time synced to the video. And you would really think something had just fallen on you. So in terms of height, of course, gaming people know this, right? But in terms of heightening your experience of something, the synced now there was no audio, but I suspect that the synced versions of audio, video, and vibration all at the simultaneously.
Like listening to the ice, is there a possibility of recording that and playing it back?
Are you talking about in the context of a lecture hall?
Yeah.
Here?
Is that what you mean?
I think if I was to do it here, I would attach a transducer to the bottom of a chair and play it, and then everyone would get a chance to sit on the chair. But that's only like one person at a time, which is in the context of here. I couldn't do it, but which is why for the conference that Greg was a part of, we built a floor so everybody, all of you, could be sitting on this floor, and then everybody is feeling everything that's being discussed.
We'll do that for
But
our next one.
that's what I did. Yeah.
You just said that the gaming industry knows
Right.
about this.
Yes.
Right.
So actually, when kids play games, you can actually create some kind of anxiety, or can you create all that things just by the vibration?
Yeah.
Is it done in Hollywood yet?
But they also, like the company that makes the transducers that I used in the MFA, their main customers are people in the gaming industry, and they put them on the bottom of chairs so that you can play your game and your chair's rocking and
Yeah, the trade name Butt Thumper. They're low frequency, so but we sense low frequency, so they work just
But they
fine.
might think it's because of the game, but they're actually feeling it through their body.
Yeah. They may consciously know that it's the game, but they may unconsciously feel the mental effects, and so
they get all kind of wrapped up.
yeah, and this is something I'm fascinated with is vibration as a hidden communication channel, or at least a non-conscious communication channel, because you don't know. Our brains tune to our ears and our eyes to know, now I'm getting information. But we don't ever say to ourselves, now there's some vibrational information leaking in. It happens very subliminally. And I know that when we had the conference that Wendy organized, we had a section with a vibrating floor where they tried to resonate various internal organs. They actually could guess at the resonant frequency. So it's quite interesting. And I believe it was the Air Force had figured out, and this was a really scientific finding, the human eyeball would resonate at a few hertz, 5 hertz. They were worried that pilots, where there would be some vibration mode inside the airplane and it would match to the resonant frequency of their eyeball, you lose sight and then you're in trouble. And there have been people who believe that haunted mansions and rooms and so forth are cases where every room has low frequency resonances in it, acoustic resonances, not vibrational resonances. And there's some fan spinning around, say at 4 hertz, very slow, just a very slow circulation fan, but it matches the resonant frequency of that room. And so all of a sudden there's a ton of energy flowing into the room at 4 hertz. And your eyeball resonates. And when it resonates, you think you see a ghost because your eyeball's resonating. It's not operating correctly. And when you turn your head to say, was that a ghost I just saw? You move your head in that whole acoustic field and the resonance goes away and you say, well, the ghost just disappeared. So it can be used to explain a lot of things, but most importantly, feelings of panic and dread. And so some people believe that, way back in prehistoric times, we were chased by dinosaurs and their feet pounding on the ground was a few hertz of resonance. and that was danger to us, and it's still danger on some level. You know?
Yeah, quick question about like the relationship between sound and visual culture, and I guess it's kind of proposed in different ways. Like Wendy, in your work, like because of the dominance of visual culture, like how do you respond with your work to that? Like how do you craft your work visually in response to what you're trying to communicate with vibration? And then I guess also in your work, like, do you find, I assume like a large part of scientific research is funding and that kind of stuff. Do you find any kind of discrimination between like, you know, like is there a dominant, do you find a bit more dominant visual culture also?
I think the dominant culture is visual and oral. I think that it's that the tactile realm is the one which is not considered as much.
I agree. I mean, in research, I'm always, most of my research, like I said, is trying to improve the built world or understand the natural world, and it focuses on vibration, exclusively, and so there's no competition in any way.
But your question about what is as a visual artist, like how do I approach the visual aspect of it? And I mean, for a lot of my work, I'm interested in like how bodies interact with the spaces that they're in, architecture or their chairs, and like what can you do to get someone to lie down on this big expanse of white wood, and so it's there's a lot of sort of sculptural considerations that go into what the platforms look like and how they're arranged in the museum and the relationship of the platforms to the museum itself and where the sun comes in through the windows. And so I'm thinking about all of those things, and then ultimately you can't hear it in the museum unless it's really, really quiet because we turn the volume way down. But ultimately, once you get on it and you feel it, then many people then just sprawled out on it, which then is a visual signal to someone else coming through the museum that they can get on it too, or they might want to get on it. So I think the visual's not left out. It's always sort of cycling through. But another thing I just want to mention is that, in deaf culture, many times they call themselves people of the eye, as opposed to lack of audition. It's like they're people of the eye, and which is very. It's also problematic because there's deaf blind is also something to consider, and they're not people of the eye. But it's a very visual world. And vibrations actually is a part of that world, both visually and tactily. And so I remember the first time I was there, we were in a bar in this big long table, and they had no problems communicating in a really loud bar because they were all signing to each other, whereas I was at a real disadvantage because I couldn't hear except for the person right next to me if they were a speaking person. But to signal to someone at the very end of the room, like they would just like pound the table, and it sends vibrations, seismic vibrations through that table. And so someone's glass of beer at the other end of the table will have little ripples. And then that's enough of a signal for the person to look up and see that who wants to talk to them from all the way at the other end of the room.
I'm just curious, with this sort of heightened awareness of vibrations and probably sometimes a hyper focus on it, how does that affect practically your daily life, the environments you choose to be in, how you arrange your homes, the kinds of people you spend your time with? How does it affect you?
Wendy?
Go ahead.
Well, why don't you go first? Well, I guess I'll say that tactile sensing of vibration is very similar to me to our sense of smell, in the sense that it evokes memories, it evokes emotions that we sometimes don't have control over. Scared, there's some big, something that I don't hear, or I may not even tactically sense, but there's something in my chest cavity that resonates at that, and it gets into my brain somehow. And the other analogy to smell is that these vibrations below 400 hertz get through almost anything, and it's like a smell wafting through, an apartment building. When it happens, it's almost impossible to stop or control. You can't control it with earplugs. You can't levitate yourself off the ground, to avoid it. It's going to be there, right? And so I find that whole thing fascinating. And it's interesting how smell, people will respond to a smell without consciously knowing that the smell has occurred to them. And they'll start to change. You hear about the scents that they put in shopping malls that make people want to shop more, right? And you don't know that this has happened. So anyway, I'm fascinated by the analogies to the sense of smell, because it seems very similar.
That's really nice.